In AI ops, it's really about automating operations, and that's a big part of AI. Is really about operations. And AI is AI security, AI networking, and AI operations, all three. But to automate stuff is key, and that's where Gen AI has really kind of been helping with, kind of like what we can do with the Chat GPT type things, and Gemini. But there's tons of other models that are out there too for Gen AI that we use. So those are three places where we're using AI, and we're seeing the impact of that.
Kelly, how are you? I'm so excited. Been really looking forward to this all day. Just to chat with you and connect. It's been a while since we've talked. So
It has been a
welcome to the
while, Nick.
build.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate you doing this. And I'm excited too.
Awesome, great, super. Let's see. So what we've been doing on the Built for Trust podcast, we've been introducing people to the community, and so people might have heard you speak. So it's like, okay, you're up on stage and speaking, or they might have been in a meeting with you with a group of other people, but they really never get to hear from you in a little bit longer format and get to know you a little bit more. And so that's really what we're looking to do here. And so I think the best way to start that process is to let everybody know really, your background, your career journey, and your path, and what kind of brought you to Versa.
Boy, where do I begin, Nick?
Yeah, well, I know I met you from Cisco days, but you can
Right.
go back a little bit further than that,
I
as
can,
well,
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it might help because, ever since I was a kid, I was always curious about communications, you know. And there's a personal story, but I won't get into that. But ever since I was, I think, about 10 years old, I had this fascination with what's behind that phone, what makes it work, and why can't everyone
Yeah.
have it? So ever since then,
Yeah.
that drove passion in me to always be in networking. My college engineering degree was in electrical engineering, but all I focused on was communications. When I
Yeah.
graduated, I actually worked for communications providers, satellite provider, and then a wireline provider up in Canada, building networks, designing networks. And as I got more into it, I realized that there was, rather than being on the consuming end of technology and deploying it, I wanted to be on the building end of it. And that's when I
Mm.
moved down to Stratacom in 1995, and Cisco acquired us in 1996. So
Huh.
I've been in the Valley since 1995 and been in the networking Valley for a long time.
Wow.
And Cisco was a great place, has been wonderful. I went there as a teenager, as I to tell people, and I came out as an adult. And
Yeah.
so many good memories of working with the people, bright people, smart people, and many of them are still there. But I decided in 2016 that I wanted to go try something different. Call it a midlife
Yeah.
crisis. I decided that I'd
Mm.
done what I could at Cisco. Now I wanted to go do something else. So that's
Yeah.
when I left, and I found Versa. Where
Yeah.
actually, I should say, the board of Versa found me, and they asked me to
Yeah.
come join.
Mm. Yeah. Awesome. It is so funny. It's like, I think I have a very similar early days. When I was doing my undergrad, I'm a double E major. I was kind of also like, oh, what am I going to do? And at that time, that was like in the mid 80s. Many of my other kind of fellow peers were going to work for Raytheon. So they were kind
Ah,
of getting into the military, not military, but, but kind of building military equipment. So I didn't want to do that. So I remember picking up, I think it was a Time magazine at the time. And it was about, a new era in telecommunications. And it was all about the 1984, breakup of the Bell system. And
right.
that's what lit my fire. And really, fiber optics was really interesting, at the time. And so, so I went to work for Digital Equipment Corporation.
Ha.
And
Okay.
so I was on the first I was on the telecom side, so I was actually building a large private fiber network for them, and then I moved on to the product side, and that's when we first introduced LAN bridges. We had routers that were microvaxes. At the time, we were kind of pushing out local area
Mm,
networks.
mm.
Um, so and I think we were both around that same time.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
It's
DECnet, LAT, X25, and the Vaxes,
yeah,
microvaxes. I used to,
Yeah.
deploy those and turn them up in customers' environments or our own environment as a service
Yeah.
provider. So it was, yeah, I remember that very vividly.
Yeah, it's like no, it's very interesting. Very kind of early days, same kind of motivation, kind of different career paths. But we're still participating like in this industry. And I'll tell you, I'm so thankful, and I'm sure you are as well, and most of us of that generation, where we got to build something that we didn't realize at the time that the entire global economy is going to rest upon,
Hmm.
being the internet, and it's something I don't think that much about, but I know like my kids, acknowledge that, that there's this contribution that you kind of made to society and to kind of the global community, as well. So
Right.
something it's always good to feel good about really what you've done in your
It is,
career,
and
and I think
I've always found
yeah.
myself in the eye of the storm. Back when it was the mid '90s, after I joined Cisco, the internet was being built out, and I found myself in the co-routing group, leading the product management team, and we were
Yeah.
working very closely with most of the ISPs building out their infrastructure. Then in
Yeah.
the 2000s, I moved into mobility, running mobility as well as routing, and that's when LTE was just happening, right? And
Yeah.
following that, when I come to Versa, it's really about security because one of the things that happened is up until the last decade. Just imagine it hasn't been that long. Most of the networks were private networks, whether it was
Yeah.
MPLS or before that frame relay or even private line. Everything was private. But now, with the advent of internet and internet being the new WAN for many of these applications, you really need security kind of built into the network. And that's
Mm.
what fundamentally intrigued me when I joined Versa was really that part. And I'm glad that I did
Yeah.
because that's a fundamental inflection point that happened in the industry at that point.
So let's talk a little bit about Versa. So one, I'm totally with you on the integration of networking and security. It had to happen. There's just so many forces kind of pushing that. But the value prop, it's like you guys started off in the SD-WAN marketplace, and then it kind of evolved into the SASE space. That obviously the integration of networking and security there. But kind of explain, Versa and your value prop, to the marketplace.
Yeah, so I got to give credit to the founders, Kumar and Apurva Mehta, great guys, really hardworking and visionaries. Because what they
Mm.
did is when they started the company back in 2012, they said, hey, in the future, there'd be no network worth having without security being built in rather than bolted on. Very
Mm.
profound because security being built in now, everyone takes for granted. Because in those days, it was like the router vendors and the firewall vendors, and the two wouldn't talk. In fact, I was
Yeah.
running a big group inside of Cisco where I couldn't put a firewall in my networking device because it was two different P&Ls, right? So
Yeah.
even in one company, that wouldn't happen. But imagine outside that, it would happen. Yeah, it wasn't happening either. So what I really found intriguing in that is that the new way of networking with security being built in was absolutely essential when internet is a new WAN. If you're going to
Hmm.
cloud, right, why take a hairpin through a private road only to get to the data center to get out to the cloud or to the internet? You want to get to internet as quickly as possible. You want to do a local breakout and get to cloud because that's where the applications are. And there's so
Yeah.
many examples of that were happening out there that were really intriguing early on. Now, what most people don't realize is that security wasn't really an afterthought for Versa. We started building security day one into the product, the portfolio. And a lot of
Mm.
folks don't really realize what I actually realized when I first came into the company, which is while everyone was building different products, different operating systems, different ASICs, different designs, like I had in the large companies and other large companies, Versa had decided to focus on building a single software stack, which did everything, all networking, including routing. Now we've actually added some switching as well, and
Mm.
SD-WAN and security, all from day one. So that
Yeah.
fundamentally differentiates us because most of our competitors or incumbents out there don't really have a single software stack, which we've now wrapped around with a single data lake, with a single console and single policy enforcement engine, policy engine around it to really build a platform. And that's
Mm.
kind of another unique thing in the industry because we've taken this platform now and extended it beyond SD-WAN. We always called it secure SD-WAN. People didn't realize why we called it secure SD-WAN. But we went from
Yeah.
secure SD-WAN to taking the same stack and deploying an SSE cloud, combining both of those to make it unified SASE, then extending that stack now into the LAN by taking the same software stack, putting it on switches, right? So
Mm.
secure SD-LAN, and also doing a security only capability as well. And our security has been rocking it according to cyber ratings. Every report that they do, whether it's cloud network firewall or enterprise firewall, we're always leading the charts. So now you've got a full platform with a single stack and a single management and orchestration engine that gives you the flexibility of doing a thing, start with something where your most biggest pain point is, and then as time comes and as you need it, you can actually expand the deployment and capability. The vision we
Yeah.
always had was the networks are going to be predictable. So what you want to build is a secure predictive network. Why? Because every day we have patterns in our lives, even networks do. And you
Mhm.
want to make sure that you're looking at the patterns and then predict what's going to happen. Same thing on security. So we've been on that journey with even before AI became a thing, with machine
Mhm.
learning back in like 2017.
Yeah. Sounds so, Kelly. I got like a whole bunch of synapses that are firing right now, but I have to hold them for a second because I have to go back to the career journey because
Ah,
there's one thing that I remember, and I need to get like clarity on. As I remember when you were at Cisco, there was a strong rumor mill that you were going to be John's Chambers replacement.
really?
That you were kind of like being groomed, to kind of replace John. No.
No, I
No.
don't. Look, John's a great mentor for me even now. We have a great
Yeah.
relationship, but I knew that, in Cisco or any other company in those days, unless you've carried a
Yeah.
bag, you don't get to the top position, right? So,
Yeah.
and I never, involved ran sales. I was more on the product side.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah.
and I knew all the three candidates that were there when John was going to move on, and Chuck was a great candidate that got selected by the board. So I
Yeah.
think they're in a good position. Look at how well Chuck has
Yeah.
done and continues to do well.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. So I had to get that. Coming back now into the whole, basically security piece. So, what threats do you guys mitigate against? So if you're deploying a Versa, systems, like, what are the major threats that are mitigated?
Well, all kinds of threats, right? So typically, in a threat environment, you gotta worry about DOS attacks, you gotta worry about malware, you gotta worry about all those pieces, right? But in most cases, the networks are fundamentally so spread out that you're not doing it as close as possible to the threat. You're actually letting
Hmm.
that traverse through your network and do it somewhere else. So what
True.
we do is we do it at the edge, closest to the user or the device or the application. And what we can
Mm.
do is our typical threat detection mechanism is, we have multiple antivirus engines running. If antivirus engines don't cut it, then we have AI-based malware detection, right? And then we also have beyond that, if you need the once and most of the common ones we can catch right there at the edge. If you need to
Mm.
send a file or something to a sandbox, and we have, of course, sandboxing that you can send that to, but you minimize the amount of time that you have to use to process the minimal number of files because most of them are being caught right at the edges. And then you can
I
react to
see.
them quickly as well, right? Now, the other thing that we do is, for example, if you as a user are coming in and your device is infected with some malware and it's doing some things, that you shouldn't be doing, whether it's reaching out to some rogue websites or whatever else, we'll detect that too, right? And based
Mm.
on our zero trust network access that we built into even a LAN switch, we can actually then contain your access to the right segment dynamically because your risk score is going up because unknown to you, your device is infected. It's
So there's a
compromised.
posture assessment, that
And
occurs when devices get plugged
exactly,
in, and I would think
exactly.
that part of kind of the universal SASE platform that you all had built is that there's got to be a pretty strong identity. You mentioned policy, so there's got to be there's this policy engine that you have. I would think identity has got to be a really important part of
Identity,
this,
right?
right? So like you have, and I would
Exactly.
think it'd be interesting if identity is not just IP address, not just the device, not just the credentials of the user, but also like the kind of applications that the person is accessible or is allowed to access. So is that kind of the profile of
It
the
is.
policy, and then the security system kind of leverages that policy to do enforcement.
That's right. Because typical policy engines typically will have match conditions, and the match conditions could be anything. Could be everything from IP address to source port, destination port, or source address, IP address, a URL. Could be the user identification identity.
Yeah.
posture, right? All of that combined together, and then there's an action associated with it. And this is
Yeah.
something that we've been doing since day one. It's not something new. Even our first SD-WAN product had this capability in it. We could identify users, we could identify applications, and then establish a policy on which user, what network, was it MPLS or internet, or wherever we need to connect to, and then do that.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about scale and size. So versus delivery model, right? So the way I've kind of always thought about Versa, it's basically a service, right? So you can kind of buy a service. There are devices that get dropped onto your facility, but the model is a service, correct? So it's like I'm not sure if you would consider it a NAS, or kind of like how do you categorize the delivery model?
Well, so there's two parts. One, I consider ourselves a SNAS, security and network as a service, right? Because that's really
Huh.
what SASE is, right?
Yeah.
Second thing is our delivery model. We actually have three different types of delivery models. One
Mm-hmm.
is we can deliver it from our cloud to
Mm-hmm.
the customer, where you consume, from our cloud, you consume some security or network connectivity between your locations if you want to, and we can do that across our cloud itself. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is and the way I describe that is, we have a building, and you can come rent a room in that building, right? So we'll give you the
Oh.
room. The second
Mm.
example is a private, and in the private, basically, it's a building that's for you. We'll help you operate it if you want, right? But it's your
Uh-huh.
building, and you can go
Uh-huh.
sell rooms or rent rooms in that. And that's typically
Yeah.
what a service provider will do with us, or a managed service provider, managed security provider will do with us, right?
Yeah.
They'll build their own building with us, and then
Mm-hmm.
either we operate it or they can co-operate it with us. But they actually take it to their customers. Now, a lot of enterprises do that too, because an enterprise may have, like in banking, for example, there's retail banking, there's corporate banking, there's wealth management, and each one is a tenant. So you can actually be a tenant in that building, and you can be completely isolated and have all the tenants kind of share the same infrastructure. And in retail, you typically find guest and corporate and HR and whatever else. Now, the third delivery model, is really a new one that's come up in the last few years, and this has come up started in more defense verticals, where we started to
Mm.
see requirements where customers wanted a completely air-gapped type approach. Now, I wouldn't say air-gapped approach, but air-gapped type approach, where they said,
Yeah.
look, we cannot connect to cloud, we cannot use SaaS services. We have to have it
Yeah.
in our own environment, whatever their environment
Right.
was, whether it's their cloud, gov cloud, or whatever. We don't really care, but it's their environment, and they wanted to
Yeah.
self-manage it and self-operate it. So in
Mm.
that sense, what we did is we came up with a sovereign model, where now you can take our entire stack and even our orchestration engines and management and policy engines, and put them in your environment, whatever that environment is, and you can
Huh.
operate it yourself. So there's three different delivery models, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, great. There's a lot of flexibility there on how you want to deploy based upon if you're in a
Right.
highly regulated, environment, or an
You
environment
got
that
it.
has a lot of
Critical
constraints.
infrastructure, right? Yeah, all
Yeah.
those things. Now, the key thing is
Yeah.
that we have customers using all three of them, right? We have
Yeah.
many customers that use the as a service model, the private, and
Yeah.
sovereign, all across the globe. It's not just unique to
Yeah.
one geography. We're seeing it across different verticals and different regions and different areas.
Yeah.
So that's one question. And all of them are typically doing SNAS, which is security and network as a service. Now, either
Yeah.
they're operating it themselves, they're the service provider inside their organization, or a service provider is doing it, or we're doing it for them.
Okay, great. Can you give us a sense of scale and size? Like how many customers or how many connections? How do you think of scale?
Yeah,
That
it's a
might
good
be
question.
a better question, and then how big is kind of the Versa, network?
Yeah, let me kind of give you a sense, because we have a lot of our business comes through our managed service provider, managed security
Hmm.
service provider customers, and they're typically, because it's a private or sovereign model, we don't even know how many customers they have. They do an entitlement with us on an ongoing basis at an aggregate number, so we don't even know
Mm.
sometimes who their customers are, right? All we know
Mm.
is that this
Right.
customer is using this much, and that's what they're paying us for. So in that sense, we have some managed service providers that have thousands of customers themselves. Others have
Hmm.
hundreds. So our customer count is likely in the thousands. Now,
Hmm.
last count, I conservatively say 10,000 and higher, but it's realistically 20,000 and more
Mm.
businesses around the world that are actually using Versa today in those three delivery models.
I see. So it's like it might be like tens of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of connections.
Well,
Those would be
in
physical
yeah,
connections.
yes,
You know,
because
yeah,
you have sites and you have users and you have devices. So when you talk
right.
about scale, what's that scale look like? I can tell you that one customer is using us across 29 million um, of their customers,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
we don't count that as 29 million. We count them as one customer, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
you
So it
have
might
the
be then tens of thousands of customers, hundreds of
exactly,
thousands of sites, millions of
exactly.
devices
You
is
got
kind
it.
of like,
Exactly
uh,
that.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's great. That's scale, and that size. So now, okay. So let's shift a little bit, towards AI. You have Versa AI, and so I'm kind of viewing that you probably are using AI in two different ways, and it's just in the way that the industry has been thinking about it. It's AI for networking and networking for AI, right? So, for your own logistics and your own operations, kind of how are you using AI there? Or if not, then not. But really, the life cycle management of versus network.
Yeah. So we started using AI, and we actually had an AI team starting to build together, a
Mm-hmm.
data scientist and the team coming together back in 2017. And
Mm-hmm.
we kind of predicted that, again, we were heading down this path of a secure predictive network. To predict, you
Yeah.
need to have telemetry, right? And our stack has a ton of telemetry. And because we do network and security, and we can do users and devices and applications and all the paths, we get tons of telemetry wherever our software is running. So we wanted
Yeah.
to kind of take this telemetry and analyze it and then be able to predict what's going to happen in the future. So that's when we
Yeah.
started our journey around AI uses. So
Mm-hmm.
our products like Verbo and Vani and some of these other capabilities have been around forever. But
Mm.
now what we're doing is we actually evolved that more dramatically. So Versa AI, we use AI in security, we use it in networking, and we also use it in operations or management. So for
Yeah.
example, and we've been working with all models, right? So for example, in security, we talked about malicious behavior and other anomaly type detection. We use deep neural networks and transformers there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of models that we use. In networking, we've been doing again anomaly detection, perhaps even prediction, and even kind of rerouting of traffic without you losing the session, right? So all those
Mm.
are possible, and we use time series, we use um, you know other types of models as well there as well. And lastly, it's AI ops. And in AI ops, it's really about automating operations, and that's a big part of AI. Is really
Mm.
about operations. In
Yeah.
AI is AI security, AI networking, and AI operations, all three. But to automate stuff is key, and that's where Gen AI has really kind of been helping with, kind of like what we can do with the Chat GPT type things and Gemini. But there's tons of other models that are out there too for Gen AI that we use. So
Yeah.
those are three places where we're using AI, and we're seeing the
So
impact of that.
I'll go ahead. I'm sorry. I
No, no, go
didn't mean
ahead.
to cut you off.
No, no, that's okay.
Yeah. So, so to me, what we've been seeing, like within the community, is um, mostly really around kind of lifecycle management, observability, and I think it's really this. There's the model that we've had in the industry for the last like 30, 35 years is the haystack model. And that's basically you have all this telemetry, and it's mostly system telemetry that is either within routers or switches, modules, firewalls, what have you, and they're emitting all this stuff. And then it basically is centralized all of those logs and all those events, and then something goes wrong, and then there's a needle in that haystack, and your basically operations team is like, hey, find the needle,
You're
in that
absolutely right.
haystack.
Right.
And so I think there's I think most people, that are in the know are just saying, time out with the haystack. We want this to be more agentic. So we have agents that are distributed, all within those devices. Forget the S flow and the, SNMP, stuff. We can, the AI, models are smart enough that we don't have to, that they can, rationalize and canonicalize, these events, but having kind of a controller or a kind of an agent of agent, that operations can interact with, and then actually go into the infrastructure to figure out what is the root cause of an outage, whether a link goes down and then you're seeing application performance, and start to pull that stuff together and get away from the whole haystack, model. So I'm not sure if that's something that you know that you're doing internally. So like I would think we'll talk about your customer facing stuff in a
Sure,
second,
sure.
but like internally.
No, absolutely. So, that's exactly what we do because we have the stack that can be your WAN edge, your LAN edge, your cloud edge, and it can do network and security telemetry. And we get all this data and the logs, which we've built a data lake around, and it's a single data
Mm-hmm.
lake. And we solve many issues for enterprises that are using us in these different places. Why? Because if they're using different vendors or different products to do this, now they've got a data engineering to do, right? Because they
Mm-hmm.
gather all this
Yeah.
data, and even some of the gathering of data isn't a push model; it's more of a pull model, right?
Yeah.
Where you got to pull the device or pull the individual elements to get that data, and now you got to stitch it together, do the data engineering part, then you can run your models on it. So instead of doing that, we've actually got a data lake, massive data lake, scales very well, and it's per customer if need be, or if it's as a service, we kind of have access to a broader data set. And then we use that data lake to do things, right? And that could be
Mm-hmm.
logs. And we correlate logs to say, hey, if these 10 users are having an issue and they're all connecting to in one particular geographic region or to one application, where could the issue be? So we then
Mm-hmm.
have a digital experience monitor that can show the customer, hey, this is where your issue is if you've got remote users having an issue. Or if we're actually deployed in the devices and as an agent, and it may not be even Versa all the way through, we can actually point to where the issue might be lying in that path between the user and the application that you're connecting to. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that just to be able to give insights and observability, and then actionable stuff too. And that's where agentic AI really helps, because agentic AI is really something that can autonomously make a decision, right, and take an action.
Yeah.
And the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that you want to automate. Again, automation is a key thing about AI. Routine tasks, which you can
Yeah.
avoid people having to go do reactively, as opposed to and allowing them to be more proactive and be more focused on high order bits, as opposed to just the day-to-day tasks that need to happen. So that's
Yeah.
where agentic AI is kind of an add-on to really what we're already doing.
Yeah. So it seems like so what you've done, inside of your own lifecycle management and to kind of maintain kind of reliability, capacity planning, within your own infrastructure, that also has a customer facing,
It
obviously
does.
benefit. So what does that look like? Is it more of like an Intel inside kind of model where it's really doesn't matter to the customer whether it's AI or not. It's really what they're just saying is a an infrastructure that is more predictable. Is more
Right.
secure.
Right.
And you're not getting pinged all the time with thousands of alerts that you have to go on these rock fetches to kind of figure
Exactly. I
out.
think it's
Yeah.
all of those, right? One is that we've had analytics capabilities around for a long time, right? So we for the longest time we could actually show customers what's really going on, give them the visibility, right?
Hmm.
And now with observability, it's like, hey, it's more taking that visibility and turning it into insights. And now we're
Hmm.
turning it into action with AI, right? So I think those are the journeys that you have to go through to automate stuff. And but you're absolutely right. That's exactly what we've been on. One of the things that we've seen more come up from customers is once they see what we are doing, they kind of say, hey, can you take data feeds from these other kind of infrastructure components that I have inside my environment and just kind
Hmm.
of correlate them for me, right? So it's more about the
Yeah.
correlation and saying, hey, I know exactly what's going on in your environment, Versa, but what if there was something else? And that's where the agentic AI model works, because there's probably some other things that are working there, and rather than push the data, it'd be great if we can just kind of do a cross connection between the other systems and us and kind of provide the customer what they need with whichever front end they would like.
That's an interesting new business, a kind of an adjacent business, for you. Like crowdsource is like, a lot of folks are kind of eliminating their SIMs and they're just basically sending all their security data into crowdsourced. Right now it's like you guys can be the same thing, but you're probably busy with what you're doing.
Well, we have a lot on our plate, and we're slowly working towards where we are, but we're actually partnering with some of those areas around the XDRs and NDRs and stuff where we've got the
Yeah.
right partnerships there, and we want to leverage those partnerships because they're actually bringing more additional value to the customers already. They might already be there, right? For forcing a customer to change is never an easy thing. So embrace what they might already have and then extend with capabilities they can bring to the bear.
Yeah. So then what have you seen? So it seems like, what Versa is offering. Let's see, I have kind of two questions and my mind is
Yeah.
kind of conflating them. So let me kind of separate them out. So one is you guys have visibility now into lots of different customers and their traffic patterns. There's been a lot of kind of within the owner community, a lot of focus around getting ready for AI applications that come on in mass, both in terms of whether if you're building clusters, that's one thing, and clearly in healthcare and pharma and financial services, they're doing that. But then there's just the day-to-day workflow, and how AI applications are now just they're riding the wave that we've always had around, bringing your own devices into work and the kinds of applications that you're using and so forth. And those are having very different impacts on traffic patterns. And so there's a couple of different things. I'm not sure if you're seeing this, yet, but it is that data gravity is starting to shift. You talked about hairpinning before, and that was basically due to a data gravity issue. So it's like the data gravity stuff is being split into lots of different data points, and so there's that kind of guides traffic. So traffic patterns are changing. Latency requirements are also changing. How do you optimize in that kind of environment where you have a lot more Brownian motion of traffic flows? So I don't know. Have you been, from your view of the marketplace, like how do you see AI's impact on just network traffic, network flows, and period?
Yeah,
Let's
it's a
start with
really,
that.
really interesting question. So let me kind of walk you through my answer
Mm-hmm.
first, which is first of all, we don't, depending upon the delivery model that you talked about, we may or
Mm-hmm.
may not have visibility into what the customer is doing, right? So I
Right.
just want to make that clear because if you're sovereign or private you have to opt in to give us visibility if we're
Yeah.
managing it. Sovereign, we have no visibility, and as a service, as long as you give us again opt in to leverage that capability, we do. And security is something that's broadly applicable across, but network visibility is unique to the customer themselves, depending upon their own network, their own profile, their own traffic. Because in a retail versus a bank environment may be different versus a manufacturing environment. So just want to make sure that's clear. Now, beyond that, what we're seeing is the following, which is sovereignty. You said data. What did you say? The data.
Gravity.
Um, gravity. So I
Yeah.
call it sovereignty. I think data sovereignty is driving a lot of the decisions that folks are making about the architecture on how they'll deploy AI. And the best example I can give you is today, um, uh, everybody's taking data and sending it up to hyperscaler clouds that are building these great infrastructures, massive infrastructures, which require massive build outs and data centers and everything else, where data models and inferencing are all kind of gathering up, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, there's concern around sovereignty is now getting a lot of businesses to rethink whether they want that data to be going out of their vault because the key for them is that data is the most precious thing, and they want to maintain it within their vault. So I do see that AI fabric that's being built in these hyperscaler data centers is getting expanded or extended outside the data center to the point where I heard this phrase in one of the other reviews where the network, the WAN that it's creating is actually the new LAN, because now we're moving to a point where you may have capacity for inference somewhere outside the hyperscaler cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Could it be the enterprise data center or a service provider or even an enterprise edge? So I think there's really three inflection points that are driving that. One is we're starting to see chipsets emerge, which are very unique, where they have a CPU and GPU merged together into the same silicon, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of decide how much of each you want and be able to put that anywhere you want in the infrastructure. Second is, of course, there's massive GPU scale that's coming. So both of those are kind of coming in. So you'll have two things that you can decide, how you want to structure it. Second thing is models. Models, there'll
Mm.
be many, and each one's going to be
There
tweaked
are.
based on the use case and the environment they're going to be in. So large language models, small language models, very small language models. The analogy I give is like, when cloud came about, we ended up at IaaS, we ended up at SaaS. How many
Yeah.
IaaS providers are there and how many SaaS providers are there? Just like that,
Yeah.
we're going to have foundation
Probably
models and
100
large
to
language
1.
models and SLMs, right? There's going to be a whole ecosystem of that. So when that
Yeah.
happens, you're going to get into this disaggregated environment where models, data, and inference, models, data, and inference could be anywhere.
Yeah.
In that model, you still need to build a connectivity and a secure fabric to be able to link those two. So in the
Mm.
model of the future, in the architecture of the future, instead of connecting users and devices with workloads or applications anywhere, it's going to be data connecting with models and inference anywhere. And the network's going to have to
Um,
be not just application aware, but data aware, model aware, and inference aware.
yeah. That's an interesting perspective. I haven't heard that perspective, but it makes a lot of sense. The other pieces that you hear a lot about is, okay, well, how can wide area networking kind of leverage the deployment of AI data centers in kind of low cost energy areas? So can you build enough bandwidth, going to those facilities that might be up in the Nordics or something like that, that are
You
able to,
can.
like,
It's
you know,
just trench out the fiber or satellite connections or whatever you can. That's easy, right? Building out the physical
you know,
capacity is not that hard. But then
mm,
figuring out where you're placing your inference, and then dynamically it should be placed on where you have capacity, compute capacity or GPU capacity. And
mm,
then being able to connect that to the right data and the right models is what you got to do, which is one
yeah.
step beyond that.
Okay. All right. Great. So I want to think. Let's talk a little bit about kind of operational staff. And I think that might kind of like bring us to landing the plane, on the podcast. But
Sure.
future of network engineering. So it seems like really where our industry is going right now is that the Versa model, and there are others that are, in essence, I think, catching up to where the compute went with the cloud providers. Meaning that, in 2007, we had kind of the Amazon introduced the first, was it, S3, S3 buckets. And so
Hmm.
we started to see that growth. So obviously kind of centralization of compute, and then compute as a service. So we've never really had that in our industry, other than kind of managed service providers,
True.
which we have had, for a long time. But I guess the thing is that as we move further down this road, what's the role of network engineers now?
Mm.
Where there isn't, like, they're not managing like hundreds of devices or thousands of devices. So there's always a big shortage of network engineers and security engineers. Like, the latest
Hmm.
numbers that I've seen is that almost like 750,000 750,000 open recs for security engineers
Mm.
worldwide. And networking engineers isn't too far. You have an open rec, that rec is usually open for at least 9 months. So, I guess, like, from your point of view, especially with some of your more kind of cloud-based, models, what does the burden on network engineering get reduced? So that you can actually deploy more, get more, kind of connectivity and networking services with fewer number of people. So I'm not sure. Have you thought through that? Or
Yeah,
what's
absolutely.
your experience on that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, look, I've been in the networking industry for a while and security industry for a while now too. And everything that I've seen in terms of customer challenges and issues has been really related to lack of automation, right?
Hmm.
And, it used to be scripting, it used to be whatever else, right? But we've kind of evolved that. And AI really helps in the automation of things. So whether it's a network engineer or security engineer, right, being able to offload routine tasks. What are those routine tasks? Detection, right? And
Yeah.
perhaps even
Mm.
response of certain types. So for example, in networking, if you have a brownout occurring in a particular connection for a certain
Yeah.
amount of times, why use that connection? Why not say, hey, I'm going to come back to it once I see it's coming back. But in the meantime, use these other connections that I have automatically and make sure that it's seamless to the user. So that actually avoids you trouble calls into your operations or your L2 engineers or L3 engineers getting involved. That's what we've been hearing from our customers for a while that we've been doing for them. But now even
Oh.
in security, detecting threats, right?
Hmm.
Having a policy framework that allows you to make the decision in automatically or with human intervention to say, okay, if this is happening, do this, right? And have that pre-programmed. So I think that the life of a network or a security engineer or an operations team is about to get a lot better.
Mm.
But it's going to take some time because everyone's going to have to build confidence in the tech, right? So the human intervention is going to be there for a while, right? But I think over time we'll be able to offload some menial tasks to AI. And as that
Oh.
happens, the network engineers and security engineers can focus on the policy setting, looking at the insights instead of, and forensic analysis will become easier by graph MLs as opposed to looking through logs and logs of data as to who got exposed to what and what was that blast radius for them. So all those things are going to become more automated, and that's going to help reduce the time and actually reduce the workload on reactive stuff and really kind of focus it on proactive stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that this is going to
Mm.
be a great way of actually moving things along. Can you handle more scale? You'll always scale will continue to rise, right? One customer told me that, hey, their CEO says our business is going to grow, but our expenses aren't going to grow at the same rate. In fact, expenses have to stay at the same level. So the only way you can get that scaling the business, scaling the infrastructure, scaling the sites, devices, users, whatever else applications you want to call it, it has to be done with lower numbers. And the only way to do that is through efficiency and automation.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Well, Kelly, this was really great. I had such a great time chatting with you and kind of learning a little bit more about Versa. I know more about Versa now than I did 45 minutes ago. So thanks so much for for that. And then also just always great to have your perspective, not just your company, but also where the industry is and where we're all kind of going collectively. So
Well,
Kelly, thanks so
thank
much.
you. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having
You're
me. Always
welcome.
good talking to you, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Excellent. Great. Thanks everyone. Thanks for plugging in.